April 7th, 1945, East China Sea. The sea is cold and gray. Swells crash against a steel mountain rising from the water. Yamato, pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the largest battleship ever built by human hands. Her massive hull cuts through the waves, 263 meters of armor and guns, a floating fortress that once symbolized the might of an empire. But today she sails on a mission from which no man expects to return. On her bridge stands Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, a career officer of calm discipline. The wind lashes his coat as he stares toward the horizon, toward Okinawa, where the last great battle of the Pacific is raging. The fleet around him is pitifully small. The cruiser Yahagi, 8 destroyers, and the Yamato herself. No air cover, no fuel for a return trip. Only one order: reach Okinawa, beach the ship, and fight until destroyed. Below decks, engineers check the turbines and damaged crews prepare emergency pumps. Gun crews polish their shells and whisper quiet prayers. In the mess decks, sailors write farewell letters they know will never be delivered. Many have tucked small good luck charms beneath their tunics. Coins, photos, bits of cloth from home. For 4 years, the Yamato had been more myth than weapon. A secret titan meant to crush the American fleet in a single decisive battle. Her 18.1-inch guns could hurl a shell the weight of a truck over 20 miles. Her armor was thick enough to shrug off almost any known weapon. But the world had changed. Above the gray horizon now ruled another power: the carrier task forces of the United States Navy. Hundreds of aircraft could strike from hundreds of miles away. In this new world, size was no longer strength. The Yamato was a monument to an idea already dead. Still, honor demanded one last voyage. At 0600 hours, smoke pours from her funnels as engines thunder to life. The fleet turns south from Tokuyama Bay, bows slicing through the chop. Black plumes trail behind, a line of sacrifice visible for miles. In Tokyo, the High Command calls the mission 10 Go, Operation Heaven Number 1. Officially, the Yamato is to lead a suicide charge against the American invasion fleet. Unofficially, everyone knows the truth. It is a gesture, not a strategy. A final act of defiance from a dying empire. On the bridge, Ito receives a coded radio message: "You will fight gloriously and die honorably." He folds the paper once, places it in his pocket, and orders the signalman to maintain radio silence. Above them, a gull wheels in the wind, the last living witness to a fleet already condemned. As the sun rises higher, the giant ship presses onward into the empty sea. Her crew of 3,000 does not yet know that hundreds of American planes are already waiting, far beyond the horizon, to write the final chapter of the battleship age. This is the story of how air power killed the super battleship. 1941, Kure Naval Arsenal, Japan. Sparks burst from a forest of scaffolding. The sound of hammers echoes across Hiroshima Bay as thousands of men labor on a project so secret that even their families are forbidden to speak of it. Beneath a canopy of tarps rises a steel mountain, the hull of Battleship Number 1. Only a handful of officers know her true name: Yamato. In those early months of war, Japan dreamed of an ocean empire stretching from China to Hawaii. Its admirals believed that the fate of nations would still be decided by the thunder of guns. Whoever possessed the biggest battleships would command the seas. This belief became dogma, the decisive battle doctrine, inherited from Tsushima, 1905. The Imperial Japanese Navy saw itself as the samurai of the sea, few in number, unmatched in skill, destined to win with one perfect stroke. If America could build 10 ships, Japan would build one that none could sink. So they built Yamato. Her keel alone weighed more than a cruiser. Her guns, 18.1 inches in diameter, fired shells as heavy as a small car. A single broadside could hurl 9 projectiles, each over 3,000 pounds, farther than the horizon. Her belt armor was 16 inches thick, her deck triple layered with steel and teak. She carried 3,200 men and enough fuel to circle half the globe, at least on paper. Every rivet symbolized Japan's industrial defiance. Engineers designed her using primitive calculators and slide rules, yet the precision bordered on miraculous. Inside her hull, a labyrinth of watertight compartments could absorb torpedo hits. Her gunfire control used mechanical computers synchronized by gears. The ship could track a moving target at 20 miles and open fire within seconds. But secrecy was absolute. Workers entered through checkpoints guarded by Kempitai military police. Couriers carried blueprints under cloth covers. When American reconnaissance planes flew over Kure, crews stretched enormous tarpaulins to conceal the unfinished hull. On paper, she did not exist. To the men who built her, Yamato embodied national destiny. Japan had few natural resources, yet in the shadow of Mount Maisen, they had forged the largest warship in human history. She was the material expression of faith, faith that willpower could overcome mathematics. As the war spread across the Pacific, reality began to shift. In May 1942 at Coral Sea, aircraft from carriers sank ships that had never seen their enemy. 1 month later at Midway, 4 Japanese carriers were destroyed by American dive bombers in a single morning. The age of the airplane had arrived, but the lessons reached Tokyo too late. Yamato slipped from dock in December 1941, days after Pearl Harbor burned. She became Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's flagship, a floating palace of command with polished decks and paper-screened cabins. Her officers spoke of a future battle where her guns would crush the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one glorious exchange. When the decisive day comes, they said, the Empire will stand immortal. Yet that day never came. The giant spent her youth in harbors, first at Truk, then Kure, burning fuel Japan could no longer spare. Her main guns fired once in anger during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, scoring few hits. By 1944, American submarines prowled every shipping lane. Oil shipments from Borneo dwindled to a trickle. The great battleships slept while the war moved to the skies. Inside Japan, propaganda turned Yamato into legend. Newspapers spoke of a mystical guardian that would rise at the empire's darkest hour. School children drew her silhouette in notebooks. Poets compared her to a mountain god watching over the nation. No one mentioned that her armor was meaningless against a 1,000-pound bomb. By 1945, the Imperial Navy was a ghost of its former self. The once mighty carrier force lay wrecked at Leyte. What remained were destroyers, a few cruisers, and the 2 Yamato-class battleships. The dream of invincibility had become a burden, an idol too sacred to destroy, too obsolete to use. When the Americans landed on Okinawa in April 1945, desperate admirals looked again to the steel mountains sleeping at Kure. "Send Yamato," they whispered. "Let her sacrifice show the spirit of the emperor." Fuel for a one-way voyage was scraped from the bottoms of depots. Orders were signed in red ink. Crews were told nothing, only that honor demanded their service. In that moment, the ship built to be unsinkable became a symbol of inevitability. Her guns, her armor, her immense power, none of it could change the truth. The world she had been built to rule no longer existed. Yamato was born in secrecy, crowned in pride, and destined to die in flame. The dream of invincibility was about to meet the sky. April 1945, Tokyo, Imperial Naval Headquarters. The war is lost, though no one dares say it aloud. American carrier fleets darken the western Pacific. Bombers strike the home islands at will. The emperor's generals speak of honor and spirit, but the warehouses are empty and the skies belong to someone else. Then comes a desperate idea, a plan so reckless that only a nation on the edge of ruin could imagine it. Operation 10 Go. The name sounds divine. 10 for heaven, go for number one. On paper, it reads like a battle plan. In truth, it is a death sentence. The concept is brutally simple. Send Yamato, the mightiest battleship ever built, south from Japan toward Okinawa. She will carry enough fuel for a one-way voyage. When she reaches the beaches, she will ground herself and become a fortress. Her 18-inch guns firing until the last shell, the last man. Around her, destroyers will defend as long as their magazines hold. There is no provision for return, no rescue. In a conference room lined with maps and cigarette smoke, Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito listens in silence. The younger officers speak with feverish excitement, dreaming of a glorious suicide that will inspire the nation. Ito, gray-faced and weary, finally answers, "If it must be done, then I will lead it." Outside, spring rain falls on Tokyo. The fuel tanks at Tokuyama are nearly dry. Crews siphon the last reserves from training vessels and depots. Mechanics weld steel plates over bomb damage. Ammunition crates are stacked to the ceilings, but there is only enough fuel for one way. Each sailor understands this without being told. On April 5th, Yamato's crew receives the official order: sortie to Okinawa. Engage enemy fleet. Do not expect return. The reaction is eerily calm. Some men cheer. Others stare at the deck in silence. Chaplains distribute ceremonial cups of sake. Letters are written, tucked into lockers, to be delivered if possible. Engineers polish the gunmetal breeches of the great turrets as if preparing a temple offering. Nearby, the light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers make ready. Isokaze, Kasumi, Hamakaze, Asashimo, Yukikaze, Fuyutsuki, Suzutsuki, Hatsushimo. Barely half carry full ammunition loads. Anti-aircraft guns are plentiful, but shells are short. Radar sets flicker and fail. Parts have been scavenged from wrecked ships. Admiral Ito walks the bridge before dawn on April 6th. He looks out over the vast hull and murmurs to his flag captain, "We are going to die. Let us make sure it is not for nothing." At 1600 hours that day, Yamato raises anchor. Her engines rumble to life, vibrating through the entire bay. From shore, dock workers remove their caps and bow as the great ship passes. The battleship's whistle sounds, a deep, mournful note echoing across the mountains. Many onlookers weep openly. Over 3,000 men line the decks. The rising sun flag flutters from her mast. For them, this is not merely duty, it is redemption, the last chance to prove that Japan's spirit remains unbroken. Yet somewhere deep inside, even the youngest sailor feels the same quiet dread, that they are sailing into history's final chapter. Far away at Okinawa, the Americans are readying their own armada. Task Force 58 patrols with hundreds of aircraft Hellcats, Avengers, Helldivers, all guided by radar, trained by experience, and fueled by a supply chain Japan can no longer imagine. Intelligence intercepts from code breakers at Guam have already revealed Yamato's departure. At dawn on April 7th, Yamato steams through the gray East China Sea at 22 knots. Her escort forms a wide arc ahead, spray flashing from their bows. The sea is rough. Black smoke rises from her funnels like funeral incense. Inside the plotting room, officers calculate fuel consumption. Less than 9 hours remain before the tanks run dry. Overhead, the sky begins to change. On radar screens aboard the U.S. carriers, Essex, Bunker Hill, and Intrepid, new blips appear, one enormous, the rest smaller. Reconnaissance pilots confirm the sighting. Large battleship with escorts course south by west. The hunters have found their prey. Admiral Ito receives the first warning shortly after 800. American aircraft have been sighted approaching from the south. He orders the fleet to battle stations. Klaxons blare, watertight doors slam shut, gun crews run to their mounts. On the open deck, 25mm anti-aircraft gunners strip to the waist, sweat mixing with spray. The air is thick with the smell of fuel and cordite. Somewhere above the clouds, 386 aircraft are forming up for the kill. The age of the battleship is about to end, not with a duel, but with a storm from the heavens. April 7th, 1945, Philippine Sea, Task Force 58. On the deck of the carrier USS Essex, mechanics tighten bolts on engines that have been running without rest for weeks. The smell of fuel and salt hangs in the air. Around them, a city of steel floats upon the endless ocean. The most powerful naval force in history, 12 carriers, 6 battleships, a dozen cruisers, and over 40 destroyers form the beating heart of Admiral Mark A. Mitcher's Fast Carrier Task Force. Above their decks wait more than 1,000 aircraft, fighters, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, each a fragment of the sky's new empire. On this morning, the Americans already know what's coming. At dawn, code breakers on Guam intercept Japanese transmissions confirming that a special surface force has departed the inland sea. The words are clear. Yamato is at sea. Within minutes, the message reaches Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet. His order is simple: intercept and destroy before they reach Okinawa. In the carrier flag rooms, officers trace the predicted course of the Japanese column across navigation charts. They call it the Floating Fortress Group, but to the men who have fought through Leyte Gulf and the Philippines, it is simply prey. Aboard Bunker Hill, pilots gather in the ready room. The air smells of sweat, coffee, and nervous energy. On the wall hangs a reconnaissance photo of Yamato, the massive triple turrets dwarfing the escort ships beside her. Lieutenant Commander Bill Martin of Air Group 84 studies the image in silence. "She's a monster," he says, "but she can't hit what she can't see." Across the task force, radar screens flicker. Operators report a large surface contact west of Okinawa, range 200 miles. The hunt has begun. By 900, 386 aircraft are warming up across 6 carriers. Deck crews in yellow jerseys guide them into position. Engines roar as propellers blur into silver discs. Bombs are hoisted, torpedoes armed, guns loaded. Above the noise, chaplains recite brief prayers over the intercom. May their aim be true and their return safe. The first wave, 132 fighters and 77 bombers, launches at 1000 hours. The sea explodes in foam as one after another, aircraft leap from the decks and vanish into cloud. From the bridge of Essex, Admiral Mitcher watches the formation climb eastward, his cap pulled low against the wind. "That's the end of the big ship," he says quietly to his chief of staff. At 11,000 feet, the strike group forms into squadrons. The pilot's radio chatter is terse, professional. They fly over gray swells where only the faintest wakes betray the enemy below. Meanwhile, aboard Yamato, lookouts spot the first glints of sunlight on wings. Alarms blare. The Japanese gunners swing their weapons skyward. Admiral Ito orders the fleet to turn north, then west, weaving in evasive zigzags. It is already too late. The American pilots descend in coordinated waves. F-6F Hellcats clearing the skies, SB-2, Sea Helldivers diving steeply from the sun, TBF Avengers sweeping in low, with their torpedoes slung beneath silver bellies. Their radios buzz with clipped commands. Attack by divisions. Port! Port! From 5 miles away, Lieutenant Junior Grade Charles Nelson can see Yamato's guns opening fire. Red tracers arc through the clouds. "It looked like the whole ocean was shooting at us," he later wrote. But the Americans are patient. They know that altitude and coordination are their armor. In the sky above Okinawa, the U.S. Navy demonstrates a new kind of warfare, combat as mathematics. Radar tracks every squadron. Radio links bind hundreds of planes into one machine. Each element moves with purpose, converging on a single target. Below on the flagship Bunker Hill, operators plot the battle in real time. Blips merge, separate, vanish. Reports stream in over coded channels. Hit on cruiser, smoke from port quarter. Large explosion amidships on destroyer. By noon, the Japanese formation is in chaos. Yahagi is hit, listing sharply. 2 destroyers burn astern. Yamato continues south, her anti-aircraft guns hammering the sky. But for every bomber she brings down, 10 more take its place. The difference is not courage, it is technology. American radar can detect a plane 100 miles away. Japanese fire control still relies on optical rangefinders and instinct. U.S. pilots carry self-sealing fuel tanks, oxygen systems, gyro gun sights. Japanese gunners fight with bare hands and burning powder. For Admiral Mitcher, the battle unfolding over the radio is confirmation of a truth learned at Midway and refined at the Philippine Sea. Power now belongs to whoever controls the air. The battleship, that once supreme weapon of empire, has become a target, a slow, magnificent relic trapped beneath an invisible net of radar beams and flight paths. As the first wave refuels, a second and third prepare to launch. Each rotation tightens the noose. Yamato is steaming straight into history's first fully integrated aerial kill zone, a modern machine of annihilation run by mathematics, signal, and oil. In Tokyo, no one yet knows it, but the age of air power has already won. The American net is closing. April 7, 1945, East China Sea. At 12:20 p.m., radar operators aboard the destroyer Yukikaze detect a swarm of dots sweeping in from the southwest seconds later. The sky fills with sound, a low growing thunder that shakes the air itself. The Americans have arrived. Aboard Yamato, claxons wail through every corridor. Bulkheads slam shut. Men rush to their stations, stepping over coils of ammunition belts and crates of 25mm shells. The air smells of oil, sweat, and fear. Inside the plotting room, Admiral Ito issues the final order. "Commence fire. Engage all targets." On deck, hundreds of anti-aircraft guns come alive. The triple 25mm mounts clatter like chainsaws, filling the air with tracers. The huge 6-inch secondary guns fire bursts that send shock waves through the deck plates. Above them, the great 18.1-inch turrets elevate toward the clouds, their barrels black with smoke. At 12:30, the first wave strikes. Dive bombers fall from the sky like blades of sunlight, SB-2C. Hell divers dive at angles so steep that even their pilots lose consciousness for seconds at a time. The sea below flashes silver with torpedoes dropped by Avengers skimming the waves. The entire horizon burns with movement, the age of the battleship colliding with the age of air. American pilots later recalled that they could see the red and white flag fluttering on Yamato's stern as they began their dives. It looked impossibly large, like a floating island of steel and fire. But the ship was not helpless. Every gun aboard Yamato was firing now. Her anti-aircraft fire created what observers described as a solid wall of flame. Even in the cockpits, pilots could feel the shock waves of her shells exploding around them. One torpedo bomber disintegrates midair, its wreckage cartwheeling into the ocean. Another bursts into flames and plunges straight into the sea's surface, leaving only foam and oil. Yet for every plane that falls, 5 more descend. The first bomb strikes Yamato's port side near the number 2 turret. It tears through the deck, detonating deep within the ship. Steel plates bend like paper. Men vanish in the blast. A second explosion follows seconds later amidships, throwing a column of smoke hundreds of feet into the air. "Direct hit near the bridge," shouts the gunnery officer. The ship lists 3 degrees to port. Pumps roar as engineers struggle to counter flood the opposite side. Fire teams drag hoses through corridors that are already filling with smoke and choking heat. Then come the torpedoes. 6 Avengers approach from the south, flying barely above the waves. Their torpedoes fall with sharp splashes, streaking toward the giant's flank. Yamato turns hard to starboard, her great rudder groaning under the strain. She avoids 2, but 4 find their mark. The explosions hammer her hull like punches from a god. Compartments flood instantly. The ship's port side sinks lower into the sea. In the engine rooms, lights flicker and die. Men are thrown from their posts as pipes burst and scalding steam fills the air. "Hold her level!" an engineer shouts over the roar. Pumps scream, electric motors overheat. The list stabilizes for a moment, then deepens. Admiral Ito grips the railing of the bridge, his face pale and unreadable around him. The horizon is chaos. Burning destroyers, plumes of smoke, and aircraft swooping like hawks. The cruiser Yahagi has already been hit multiple times, her engines dead in the water. Destroyers Asashimo and Hamikaze are gone, vanishing in bursts of orange flame. Yet Yamato still fights. Her forward batteries fire blind into the clouds, each shell weighing over a ton. The shock of every salvo makes her entire hull shudder. Gunners scream as their gun barrels melt from continuous fire. Powder smoke blankets the decks above the carnage. The Americans circle back for their second pass. Pilots mark their targets calmly over the radio. "That big one's still alive. Hit her again." The next wave dives in, guided by sunlight reflecting off the water. Torpedoes streak low across the waves. Bombs fall in glittering arcs. Each hit carves deeper wounds into the giant's body. Within minutes, Yamato's list increases to 15 degrees. Her speed drops to 12 knots. Inside, corridors are flooded waist-deep. Men carry wounded comrades through darkness, lit only by the flicker of fires. The voice over the intercom repeats one command: "Keep firing! Keep firing!" By 1:20 p.m., the battle has become a slaughter. Yamato is still afloat, but she is dying slowly. Her armor plate cracked, her turbines faltering. Smoke pours from her funnels in black spirals visible 50 miles away. The destroyer Yukikashi maneuvers desperately alongside, trying to shield her with anti-aircraft fire. It is a hopeless gesture, but one born of loyalty that only sailors could understand. For the American pilots, the great ship has become both a target and a symbol. Many later admitted to feeling awe as they attacked her. The sense of witnessing the end of an Era 1 aviator wrote in his logbook that Yamato seemed to fight the entire world by herself. But no human courage can stand against the arithmetic of the sky. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of bombs, and the relentless geometry of radar-guided coordination. Together, they are rewriting the laws of war as the waves close over the burning sea. The once invincible Titan staggers onward, half blind, half sunken, still firing. Contact at sea has been made, and the outcome is already written. April 7th, 1945, 1:33 p.m. The sea around Yamato is an inferno. Her decks are scorched, her paint blistered, her flag still flying through the smoke. The great battleship has taken at least a dozen bomb and torpedo hits, but she refuses to die. Inside her hull, men move through corridors that no longer have meaning, twisted, flooded, burning. The ship is listing more than 20 degrees to port. Bulkheads groan under pressure. Oil and seawater mix into black rivers running along the decks. In the damage control center, officers shout reports over the roar of collapsing steel. Port engine room flooded. No. 3 generator out. Every compartment forward of the bridge is gone. Electrical power flickers, then dies completely. The only light now comes from emergency lanterns and fire. Admiral Seiichi Ito stands on the bridge, his uniform soaked in oil and sweat. He has refused to leave his post. Nearby, Captain Kosaku Ariga grips the railing, his knuckles white. The two men exchange a single glance. No words, they already know. Below decks, in the ammunition magazines, sailors work in suffocating heat. The thermometer reads 130 degrees Fahrenheit. They shovel water, pass sandbags, anything to slow the flooding. Some remove their shirts, others their shoes, just to move faster through the rising water. Every few seconds, the hull trembles as another bomb explodes above. Then at 1:42 p.m., 5 torpedoes strike in quick succession along the port side. The shock is beyond imagination. Men are thrown against steel walls. Gauges shatter. The floor tilts suddenly. The ship's massive armor belt, once thought invincible, tears open like paper seawater floods in with the sound of 1,000 drums. Within minutes, Yamato lists 30 degrees. The port-side anti-aircraft guns are underwater. Ammunition begins cooking off. Small explosions popping like gunfire as shells heat and detonate. Flames reach the main battery turrets. The paint burns in white-hot waves. On the upper deck, wounded men crawl through smoke toward the starboard side. Some leap into the sea, their uniforms on fire. Others cling to gun barrels, praying the ocean is filled with oil slicks burning like black glass. Pieces of wreckage, life rafts, boots, human bodies, drift together in the waves. American pilots circle overhead. watching the end of the giant. She's turning over, one reports, the biggest ship in the world, rolling like a whale. They can see the red rising sun on her deck turning slowly toward the water. At 1:50, another torpedo hits near the aft engine room. The damage is catastrophic. Water rushes through the stern compartments, flooding the propeller shafts. The last generators fail. Communication lines go dead. The voice tubes carry only static and the sound of rushing water. Captain Arriga gives his final order. All hands prepare to abandon ship. Some obey. Others refuse to leave their posts. In the engine room, engineers salute their chief before sealing themselves inside to keep the pumps running. On the bridge, Admiral Ito remains motionless, his gaze fixed on the burning horizon. When aides beg him to evacuate, he shakes his head. The commander does not abandon his ship. At 2 p.m., Yamato reaches her final agony. Her list has passed 45 degrees. The starboard guns point uselessly toward the sky. Inside the number 2 magazine, fire reaches the cordite stores. The explosion that follows is so vast that it tears open the sea. Witnesses aboard nearby destroyers describe a flash brighter than the sun, a white fireball rising thousands of feet into the air. The shock wave flattens clouds and ripples across the water for miles. The battleship that once weighed 72,000 tons is lifted from the ocean as if by an invisible hand. Her hull splits in two. Her bow and stern twist away, flames bursting from the seams. For a brief moment she seems to hang in midair, a burning mountain of steel, before gravity claims her. The sound comes 5 seconds later, a single thunderous boom that echoes across the East China Sea. From the destroyer Yukikaze, sailors watch in silence. The sky rains fragments of metal and charred debris. The concussion knocks men to the deck. A few miles away, the cruiser Yahagi sinks beneath the waves, leaving only oil and wreckage of Yamato's crew of more than 3,000. Only a few hundred survive. The rest vanish with her, swallowed by the fire and the sea. The explosion is visible from Kyushu, 200 miles away. Fishermen along the coast look up at the distant column of smoke and know instinctively what it means. The pride of the Imperial Navy is gone. In Tokyo, hours later, the first coded message arrives. Yamato lost with all hands. Operation Tengo terminated. The dream that began in the shipyards of Kuri 4 years earlier ends here, in black water, fire, and silence. For centuries, Japan had believed in the invincibility of the warrior spirit. In the idea that courage could overcome technology, Yamato's death proved otherwise. As the last fragments of her burning hull sink beneath the waves, the Pacific War enters its final season, an age where the air, not the sea, will decide the fate of empires. The ship built to embody the soul of Japan dies the way she lived, in fire and steel. April 7th, 1945, 2:30 p.m. The thunder fades. The sea is quiet again. Where once the greatest battleship ever built stood defiant against the sky, now there is only a dark patch of oil spreading across the East China Sea. Bits of wood, paper, and steel drift among bodies that roll gently with the waves. The smell of burning oil and cordite hangs heavy over the water. Out of the smoke, the destroyer Yukikaze returns, engines throttled low. Her crew stand along the rails, scanning the wreckage for survivors. The air still shimmers from heat, the sky streaked with the thin contrails of retreating aircraft. Somewhere below, 72,000 tons of steel sink into the black depths, Still glowing with trapped fire, sailors throw ropes into the sea. Voices shout over the wind. A few men, blackened, half-naked, covered in oil, reach up weakly, grasping the lines. They are pulled aboard one by one, eyes empty, uniforms shredded. Some weep, some do not speak at all. They have seen their world die. A few hundred survive. Out of more than 3,000, less than 300 will live to tell the story. One of them, Chief Petty Officer Masao Uchida, later recalled, "The ocean was on fire, men were swimming in oil. We heard the ship exploding under the water. Deep, distant, like thunder that would not end. Rescue crews know the danger. Oil slicks still burn on the surface, and unexploded shells drift just below. But the destroyers persist, circling through the debris, calling into the smoke, 'Over here! Over here!' At 3 p.m., Yukikaze, Fuyutsuki, and Suzutsuki begin the slow retreat northward. Their decks are crowded with survivors, men wrapped in blankets, many too burned or wounded to stand. Medics pour sake into trembling hands to dull the pain. For them, the sea is both grave and sanctuary. Behind them, a vast plume of smoke still marks the place where Yamato died. It will remain visible until nightfall. Beneath that cloud lies the broken hull, now resting upright on the seabed, 1,000 feet below the surface, a steel tomb sealed forever by pressure and silence. In the air above, American aircraft circle one last time, photographing the wreckage. The pilots are exhausted, their fuel nearly gone. Over the radio, voices sound more subdued now. "The big one's finished," one pilot says quietly. Another replies, "She went down fighting." For many of them, the victory feels strange. The sight of the massive ship dying in fire has left them speechless. Some write in their logbooks that it was beautiful in a terrible way. A moment where history itself seemed to end in front of their eyes. As the sun lowers toward the horizon, the American fleet turns east. The battle is over. In Tokyo, no one yet knows that the symbol of Japan's naval pride has been erased from the sea that night. On the decks of the surviving Japanese destroyers, the wounded lie in rows under the stars. Some call out names of friends who will never answer. Others stare silently into the dark water, listening to the faint echoes rising from below. The ship creaking, settling into the mud. The sound is like the sigh of something ancient dying. Captain Ariga's body will never be found, nor Admiral Ito's. Both men remain entombed within the shattered hull, their command posts sealed by collapsing steel. Their last order, given in calm voices amid chaos, still drifts through naval history. Do not let Yamato die in vain. For the survivors, that command becomes a burden. After the war, they rarely speak of what they saw. When asked, they describe not the glory of battle, but the loneliness of the sea, the endless hours waiting for rescue, the cries fading one by one as the sun went down decades later. When divers finally locate Yamato's wreck in the 1980s, they find her lying on her side, her bow torn away, her gun still pointing toward the surface. The site is declared a war grave. No one disturbs it. On the seabed, her name is still visible on the stern. Daiei Yamato. Historians call her lost the end of the battleship era. The age of armored giants, of duel and honor in steel, was finished. The war had moved beyond that, into the age of radar, carriers, and atomic fire. But for those who built her, served aboard her, and died with her, Yamato was more than a weapon. She was a promise that Japan could defy the impossible. When she sank, that promise went with her. Even today, fishermen passing over her grave say the water there feels different, heavier, quieter, as if the ocean remembers. On clear days, the sunlight cuts through the waves, and for a brief moment, shapes seem to rise from the depths. The curve of a hull, the shadow of guns, the outline of a flag still waving in darkness. The war moves on, the world moves on, but the echo remains, deep beneath the East China Sea, where the Yamato still sleeps. The world's last great battleship had died, and with her, an age. When Yamato sank beneath the East China Sea on April 7, 1945, it was not merely the loss of a ship, it was the end of an idea, that armor and guns could rule the oceans. For half a century, the battleship had been the symbol of national power. From HMS Dreadnought to Bismarck to Missouri, these floating fortresses embodied the belief that strength could be measured in steel and caliber. Yamato was the ultimate expression of that belief, and its grave. The airmen who destroyed her were not aristocratic captains commanding fleets, but young men barely out of school, sitting inside aluminum cockpits. Their weapons were speed, altitude, and precision, not armor. In their hands, the future of warfare had already arrived. After the battle, Admiral Raymond Spruance received the coded message, "Target destroyed." He read it without emotion, then quietly said, "So ends the battleship Yamato." To Spruance, it was simply confirmation of what the Pacific had already taught, that the era of air power was now absolute. Across the Pacific, the U.S. Navy's carrier force stood unchallenged. Its reach extended thousands of miles. Its aircraft could strike any target, any coast, and vanish before retaliation. Yamato had represented the old world. Massive, slow, bound by the horizon. The carriers represented the new, fluid, invisible, limitless. At Kure, Japanese naval engineers who had once built Yamato watched the news of her destruction in silence. For them, it was a personal defeat. They had poured their lives into creating a machine of invincibility, the very soul of their nation forged in armor plate. Now that armor lay scattered across the ocean floor. In Tokyo, government radio broadcasts described her loss with evasive words. "Our fleet has fought bravely south of Kyushu." The truth, that Japan's greatest ship had been annihilated before firing a single main gun shell, was too painful to admit. Even among the military staff, the realization spread slowly. No ship, no fleet, could survive against the skies. Historians would later see Yamato's death as the final act of a long evolution. The age of naval warfare had changed course decades earlier. At Coral Sea, at Midway, at Leyte Gulf. But only here, in the East China Sea, did the old gods truly fall. The greatest battleship in history had met her end without ever sighting an enemy fleet. In America, newspapers printed the story with triumph and melancholy. Yamato sunk, world's largest battleship destroyed by air. For the public, it was a victory. For the strategists, it was confirmation. Naval warfare had passed into a new dimension. What had taken years to build could now be destroyed in minutes. 1,000 aircraft had accomplished what entire armadas could not. Admiral Mitcher's task force continued its operations toward Okinawa, launching hundreds more sorties each day. The U.S. Navy no longer sought battleship duels. It sought control of the air and the ability to strike anywhere on Earth. The lessons of Yamato's death reached far beyond Japan. In Europe, Germany's Tirpitz had already been sunk by bombers in Norwegian fjords. The British Royal Navy shifted its faith to carriers. Even the Soviet Union would abandon plans for a massive battleship fleet after the war, focusing instead on submarines and missiles. The age of gunfire was over. The age of flight had begun. In the years after the war, American engineers studied the wrecks of ships like Yamato and Musashi. Examining the scars left by bombs and torpedoes, they found a truth written in twisted steel. No amount of armor could stop precision and speed. The new weapon was not thickness, but intelligence. From the decks of carriers would soon rise jets capable of breaking the sound barrier. Radar and electronics would make the ocean transparent. Later, missiles would extend the reach of destruction beyond the horizon entirely. Yamato's death was not the end of war at sea, it was its transformation. Yet even in defeat, there remains something awe-inspiring about her story. The ship that had carried the name of Japan's ancient heartland had fought against impossible odds, not to win, but to die well. In that sense, Yamato fulfilled her destiny, a symbol of sacrifice, of a nation's fading faith in invincibility. In the post-war years, Japan would rebuild from the ashes. The shipyards at Kure would rise again, this time building merchant vessels, tankers, and peaceful fleets. The same docks that once gave birth to a weapon of total war would now serve a nation dedicated to peace. But the memory remained. The men who had seen Yamato die carried her image all their lives. The sight of the sea erupting in fire, the echo of her guns lost beneath the roar of aircraft. For them, the lesson was clear. Human courage could not outpace progress. In museums and archives, her blueprints still exist. Massive sheets of paper covered with perfect lines, as if drawn by gods. Engineers study them not to resurrect her, but to remember what ambition once looked like. Yamato was built to embody eternity. Instead, she became a monument to change. The waves have long since covered her, but the meaning remains. No empire, no machine, no symbol of power is immune to the future. The age of air power had begun, and the world would never be the same. When the war ended, Yamato lay silent beneath the sea, but her shadow stretched across the decades that followed. Japan was a nation in ruins, cities burned, millions displaced, an empire dissolved. Yet amid the wreckage, the name Yamato remained. It echoed in whispered stories, in newspaper memorials, in the hearts of men who had once believed she would defend their homeland. For those who survived, she became more than a lost ship. She became a symbol of everything Japan had been and everything it had lost. In the years after 1945, families of the fallen visited the shores of Kagoshima, looking out toward the East China Sea. Many brought flowers and incense, praying to the empty horizon. Some still believed their sons lived, taken by the sea but not gone to them. Yamato was not just steel, she was spirit. In Tokyo, writers and artists began to reinterpret her story. The Yamato that had once represented imperial might was reborn as tragedy, a poetic image of beauty destroyed by modernity. Novels, plays, and poems described her as a floating temple, a sacrifice made to the gods of progress. During the 1950s and 60s, as Japan rebuilt itself into a peaceful industrial nation, the Yamato legend transformed again. To a new generation, she represented not war, but craftsmanship, the height of Japanese engineering, artistry, and discipline. Shipbuilders in Kure spoke of her as a masterpiece of human effort, even as they now built cargo ships and tankers instead of war machines. By the 1970s, the Yamato story entered popular culture. A new television series, Space Battleship Yamato, reimagined her as a starship reborn to defend humanity in the distant future. The show captured the imagination of millions, blending history, science fiction, and national nostalgia. Its creators said they wanted to redeem the Yamato, to let her sail again, not for war, but for hope. The show's success revealed something deeper: Japan's desire to reconcile pride with peace. The ship that once symbolized defeat now symbolized rebirth. Meanwhile, beneath the waves, the real Yamato slept on. In 1985, a Japanese research team located her wreck using sonar. They discovered a massive shadow resting 340 meters below the surface. Her bow blown off, her turrets buried in silt. When cameras descended, they found the wreck split in two, but unmistakable. The great 18.1-inch guns still pointed toward the sky, frozen in the moment of her death. For the divers, it was like entering a temple. They described seeing the ship's nameplate, still legible, covered in coral and time. Some wept, others saluted. The sea had preserved her not as a weapon, but as a monument. News of the discovery spread quickly across Japan. Newspapers called it the return of Yamato. Television showed footage of the wreck, and once again, the nation paused. Schools held moments of silence. Veterans groups organized memorial services in Kure, Hiroshima, and Kagoshima. At the Kure Naval Museum, now known simply as the Yamato Museum, engineers, students, and tourists gathered to study her story. A 1/10 scale model of the battleship stands at the center, 40 meters long, built with meticulous accuracy. Visitors walk along her decks, reading the names of the crew who perished. For many, it is not a celebration of war, but a lesson in humility. On anniversary of her sinking, families still visit the coast. Some bring model ships, others toss paper cranes into the waves. At sunset, the sea glows red, and for a moment it feels as if the ship still lingers there, unseen, eternal. The Yamato became more than history. She became memory, a mirror in which Japan could see both its past and its transformation. Historians continue to debate what she truly represented. To some, she was a tragic symbol of militarism's futility, the arrogance of steel against the power of progress. To others, she remains a testament to courage, discipline, and sacrifice. Between those interpretations lies the truth of modern Japan, a nation shaped by remembrance, not revenge. 8 decades later, the name Yamato still carries weight in movies, novels, and songs. She reappears, not as a weapon, but as an echo of endurance. In the end, the ship's story did not end in 1945. It continues wherever people search for meaning and loss, wherever they ask how greatness and tragedy can coexist. The shadow of Yamato still stretches across the water, across time itself, reminding us that even the mightiest creations of war can become symbols of peace. And somewhere beneath the waves of the East China Sea, the great ship sleeps, no longer feared, no longer worshipped, but remembered. The sea remembers. Beneath the waves of the East China Sea lies not only steel and wreckage, but the memory of an empire, the rise, the fall, and the silence that followed. The story of Yamato is not only the story of a ship, it is the story of ambition, of a nation that dreamed of greatness through might and learned the cost of that dream. When she went down in 1945, Japan's fate was already sealed. Cities lay in ruins, millions starved. The once mighty Imperial Navy was gone, scattered like ash across the Pacific. Yet from those ashes, something remarkable emerged. The country that had built the world's largest battleship would, within a generation, build the world's most advanced peaceful industry. The same spirit of precision and discipline that created Yamato now forged cameras, cars, and ships that carried trade, not war. In the years after surrender, the name Yamato came to represent something entirely new. Not the arrogance of empire, but the resilience of rebirth. In schools, children studied her as a symbol of lessons learned. Historians debated her as the moment the old world ended. Filmmakers used her story to question the very nature of progress, how technology, once unleashed, could either save or destroy. On the other side of the Pacific, the Americans who had fought against her also remembered many spoke not with hatred, but with respect. They had seen courage in their enemies, courage bound by a cause already lost. But courage nonetheless, Admiral Nimitz himself would later write, Yamato represented the ultimate achievement of naval architecture and the ultimate futility of it. In her destruction, the world saw the truth of modern war, that human invention had outpaced human control. Yamato's death marked the end of the battleship age, but it also marked the beginning of something greater. The realization that power alone could no longer decide the fate of nations. When Japan rebuilt, it turned its gaze inward, away from conquest and toward creation. Factories rose where shipyards once stood. Engineers who had once forged armor now built engines of progress. The sound of hammers in Kure returned. But this time, they rang with hope. The ocean that once carried fleets of war now carried goods, ideas, and friendship. The Pacific became not a battlefield, but a bridge. And yet, beneath that same sea, Yamato remained, a silent witness to it all. Divers who visited her tomb speak of an eerie stillness. Fish drift through shattered corridors where men once fought and died. Coral covers the turrets like flowers on a grave. The water is clear, the light soft and endless. One diver described it simply, it feels like time has stopped. Perhaps that is what Yamato truly became. A place where time itself paused, caught between the world that was and the world that followed for Japan. She is no longer a symbol of war, but of remembrance. A reminder of where blind faith and strength can lead, and how far a nation can rise after it falls. For the world, she stands as an echo of every empire that ever believed itself invincible. From Rome's legions to Britain's fleets, from the fortresses of Europe to the bombers of the 20th century, all share the same fate. Every empire meets its Yamato. Every monument to power becomes a relic, yet even in ruin, there is beauty. The same hands that built weapons can build peace. The same human drive that creates destruction can also create art, science, and progress. That is the paradox of Yamato, a masterpiece of engineering born for war, now teaching peace through its silence. As the sun sets over the East China Sea, the water turns gold. The waves rise and fall where the ship once sailed, each one carrying the memory a little farther into eternity. The Yamato sleeps, not as a weapon, not as a warning, but as a story. The story of how power rises, how it falls, and how humanity endures beyond both. This is her epitaph. And through her, the world learned that even the mightiest giants can be swallowed by the sea, but the lessons they leave behind are never lost.